Good morning, FDIC. We are kicking off today with your favorite vegetable lady. Yes, the dietitian is kicking off here Thursday morning. So today we are going to be talking about Fueling Fire, the podcast for firefighter nutrition for firefighters. And this podcast is brought to you by Firehouse Subs. The firefighter founded hot sub chain with a passion for hearty and flavorful food, heartfelt service, and public safety. Ready for your next mission? Firehouse Subs is offering firefighters the opportunity to continue serving after the service now as restaurant owners. Learn more at firehousesubsfranchising.com. Okay. All right. So we're getting right into it. So I know it's a difficult week from a food standpoint for most of our first responders here at FDIC. You know, you're not at home. It's difficult to find food where it's not super crowded, or maybe you just want to eat whatever you want because you're on vacation, right? Which is totally understandable. But when we talk about eating for travel, there are ways that you can kind of still hit your goals, you know, from a muscle building standpoint, from a fat loss standpoint, or even just maintaining for the week is really not the worst situation, right? But we also want to talk about if you're doing some of the hot classes, if you're doing some of the tech rescue trainings, how are you going to be able to fuel for those trainings so that you don't feel lightheaded or so that you can at least feel like you're powering through those trainings, right? So how can we eat optimally when we are out traveling? So some of my best tips from a travel perspective kind of already passed, right? It's packing for the travel, right? But for future reference, when we're talking about packing for travel, packing for conferences, what are some things that you can keep in your suitcase that TSA is not going to beat you up for, right? So things that I like to keep on hand is a Quest bar or a protein bar. A lot of my clients like Aloha bars, which are basically protein bars that actually taste good, right? You can do your Premier Protein or whatever Costco brand protein bar they have on hand. But the challenge is sometimes they melt in the suitcase, right? They get all sticky, or you just might not even want to eat it, right? So those are going to be your most portable protein options from a bar standpoint. Typically, shakes are also something you could consider once you arrive at the location. A lot of 7-Elevens or other grocery chains, CVS's, if that's walkable from your hotel, usually they will have protein shakes right next to your favorite section, the energy drink section, right? So usually you'll be able to find either a Muscle Milk or a Premier Protein, something that's going to be at least 25 grams of protein, which can be a good option for kicking off breakfast if you don't want to eat a ton of eggs first thing in the morning. Some people like that, some people don't. Right. So protein is a big factor there to help keep you full throughout the day or bridge the gap between meals, right? Because sometimes dinner might be a little later than what you're used to. Some other things that we can think about is the plant part, right? So usually what I like to say is whenever you're traveling or you're eating on the go in general, whether it's on shift or off, if you can get a protein and a plant at each meal, you're doing better than most people, right? And the protein piece is going to be for your gains, right? To keep your muscle around, to maximize muscle growth and maintenance, and to help recover from active shifts or your workouts, right? So we're trying to get that protein in at least 3 to 4 times throughout the day to maximize muscle protein synthesis. And we're looking at around somewhere between 20 and 35 grams minimum. A lot of questions I get on that protein bit is, well, how much protein can I absorb in a meal, right? That's a big question I get. And here's the thing. If you couldn't absorb something, your body will know it, okay? So I don't know if you've ever read the sugar-free gummy bear reviews on Amazon, but that is a key case of where you ate something that your body potentially could not absorb, right? So when we're talking about absorption challenges, things like sugar alcohols are actually the main offender, not protein, right? So sugar alcohols are available to flavor food. However, when you eat too much sugar alcohols, they are not digested effectively, typically in large quantities. So they can run right through you essentially, especially if you get some of those small gummy packets and you eat the whole thing, which we all know that if anybody's eating, no one's eating just one serving of a 3-serving gummy bear packet this big. So that's how we know when something is not getting absorbed, right? But in the case of protein, that's not what we're talking about. So you'll see these influencers on the internet saying, if you have any more than 30 grams of protein in a meal, it's going to go right through you. And that's not the case, right? If that's the case, you got some sort of food poisoning, right? So What research suggests is that about 30 grams of protein will be utilized for muscle protein synthesis, again, aka your gains, right? For muscle recovery. However, um, that extra, like say you wanted to go to Chipotle and you got a double meat burrito bowl after one of the hot trainings, you're going to absorb that 60 to 70 grams of protein, no problem, right? Just about 30 of that is going to be used for muscle protein synthesis, and the rest is going to be used for, skin, hair, nails, cell structure, hormones, enzymes. What a lot of people don't realize is that protein's not just used for muscle gain and maintenance, it's used for so many other processes in the body, right? It's a primary building block for a lot of your cells, right? So if you eat more, it's not the end of the world, right? Now, so we've got our protein. So our protein choices are typically animal-based foods, though for my vegans and vegetarians, we have things like nuts, seeds, and soy, which are a little bit more difficult to get on the go, but not impossible, especially at Indian or Mediterranean restaurants. But the protein piece should be a good portion of your meals. And yes, sometimes it's going to come with a little extra fat. Sometimes you just want to get a pulled pork sandwich or a burger or whatever at dinner, and that's perfectly fine. It's just, again, we're trying to keep things relatively in moderation, which might be difficult to do in a conference week. Now, the second piece is actually the most challenging piece for most of my first responders on shift and when they're traveling. And that's the plant piece, right? So the plant part of this equation is me trying to get more fiber into your diets, right? So I work full time for a large department in the DC area, about 1,600 firefighters. And most of my day is one-on-one coaching, if it's not, station visits and that kind of stuff. And in my one-on-one coaching sessions, a lot of my first responders are coming to me with 5-10 grams of fiber total in a day with their food logs. And the challenge with that is that the American Heart Association recommends 25 grams per day for women and 30 to 38 grams of fiber per day for men. So most of my first responders are really falling short on the fiber number. And why is that so important? Well, fiber, number one, it helps keep you full. And a lot of my first responders come to me when they're hungry all the time. They, feel like they're eating constantly. And part of that is they need to fuel appropriately on shift. But the other part is they're not hitting that fiber number to help bulk up their meals and keep them full longer between meals. So getting your fiber closer to 30 to 38 grams per day can make a big difference in your hunger levels. It can also help with cholesterol and blood glucose management, right? So cholesterol, blood glucose actually can help get cleared from your system through fiber. So if you remember Silly Putty in the 90s, right? If you slapped it down on newspaper, you peel it up, it would pull up the ink, right? So fiber acts similar to Silly Putty, rolling through the arteries, rolling through your system, and picking up excess blood glucose and excess cholesterol. So if you've gone to your OC Health physical and they said, hey, man, your cholesterol's high, your blood glucose is creeping up, we're thinking you might be maybe pre-diabetic, then increasing your fiber can make a big difference on those numbers. In fact, that's the first thing as a dietitian we will do to your diet. So if fiber is so helpful for keeping you full and for managing your cholesterol and managing your blood glucose, how do I get that into my diet? Well, that is typically through plant foods. So your fruits, your veggies, your nuts, your seeds, your soy, those kinds of things. If it came from a plant, it probably is high in fiber because fiber is actually the structural point or the structural part of the cell for our plant cells, right? So how do I get that on the go though? Because really no one wants to just eat salads all day. Though I do recommend when traveling, if you can get one salad a day, that's usually the easiest option from a plant standpoint. Typically, when I'm recommending packing a go bag, right? So a go bag is something that you can bring either when you're traveling or literally clip it onto whatever unit you're assigned to. What are some things that are plant-based but also high in fiber that'll keep you full between calls, right? So applesauce pouches. Everybody makes fun of me for talking about the applesauce pouches, and then I get them on the sauce and they never turn back, right? So applesauce pouches are a really easy way to boost your energy when your brain is starting to go between calls. They are also a really great source of carbohydrate for a workout or for a training or drill. Now, the challenge is these aren't always TSA appropriate unless you have a baby with you. Sometimes you can get away with it. But if you have an applesauce pouch, right before some of those active trainings. It will help you push at least for another good 20, 30 minutes, right? Obviously, we want more carbs before that. But applesauce pouches, full serving fruit, non-perishable, you can keep it in a go bag. Other things that are great are nuts and seeds trail mixes, right? A lot of my first responders overlook these, but they're super portable, super convenient, and your nuts and seeds are also going to have fiber in them, plus a little bit of protein, right? Another thing you can think about is dried fruit. So dried fruit you can get from the grocery store. Trader Joe's or some of these other grocery store chains will have a bazillion, bajillion different types of dried fruit available. And some of my client favorites are dried mango, dried clementines, right? So you don't have to just think craisins and raisins. I know when I think dried fruit, those are the first things I think, and I'm like, meh, not really interested. But try and be a little more adventurous with your dried fruit options, right? And then there's another type of bar that you could consider, which is a That's It bar. So That's It bars or Kind press bars are just dried fruit mashed up into a bar, right? And these are some of my favorite things for travel because you can throw them in a bag. If they get mushed or smashed, I mean, you're not going to notice a difference because that's essentially what they are anyway. And they're super quick and convenient and portable, and they give you some fiber. And at least a half serving of fruit for the mini bars from Costco, and then the full serving of fruit from the larger bars from your regular grocery store. So those are some portable ways that you can get that plant option when you are on the go. Now, how do I do this at a fast food restaurant? How do I do this at my meals here at FDIC? Well, I know for me, I try when I'm traveling to make at least one of my meals some sort of fun salad. And when I say fun salad, not that sad little garden salad that no one really wants to eat with their meals, right? Something that's really interesting if you can at the restaurant. Now, sometimes that's not where everybody's going. Do your best, right? But again, when you're trying to get that protein piece, right? Ideally, a leaner choice if you can. Chicken, poultry, a leaner cut of steak. Those are going to be some good options. And then, of course, your plant piece with the salad. So a protein and a plant, if you can get that 3 times spread throughout the day, you're doing better than most first responders, right? Whether that's at home or here at FDIC, right? So the other thing I didn't mention here, which you'll notice, is carbs, right? So when I talk about protein and plant, like I'm trying to triage this down to the main things that most of my first responders are missing from a food standpoint throughout their shift, throughout their days, throughout their travel time, right? Those are the things that go right out the window. But carbs, like I know for me, if someone has like a potato as an option, that's the first thing going on my plate. So I'm not worried about carbs there, right? But carbs are going to be important, especially if you're doing any of the hot trainings or any of the tech rescue trainings, because you need the carbs to continue to perform. And sometimes what I see my first responders do is maybe miss that first meal, right? You maybe slept in a little bit, maybe overindulged the night before their training, and they're running out the door to get to these trainings and they haven't eaten. And then they're wondering why they feel so groggy and awful and tired. And again, it could be from the overindulging, but the other side it could be is you didn't get any carbs in. So ideally before these trainings, these drills, whatever, we want to get at least 30 to 60 grams of carbs prior to some of the more active trainings. And then you're going to continue to have 30 to 60 grams of carbs throughout those trainings every hour on the hour. That's here during your hot trainings, and that's at home during your drills, right? So, again, 30 to 60 grams of carbs. Now, how do I do that through food? So Fig bars, Cliff bars, Belvita bars. For my people who have a bunch of tons of different allergies, whether you're allergic to gluten-free, dairy-free, I recommend Bobo's, B-O-B-O, because they do not have any of the 9 major allergens, right? Those are all going to have somewhere around 40 grams of carbs, so they're great for powering you through those workouts. If you have the ability to grab a fruit cup, if you have the ability to find some applesauce pouches, something like that, those also work really well, or a Gatorade, right? And again, if you've overindulged, it could also be a hydration thing, right? So while we need those carbs for hot training, we also need to think about hydration. So hydration from a general standpoint, we are looking for somewhere between 90 ounces of fluid per day for women and 125 ounces per day for men. Right? So most of my firefighters, when they hear that number, they're like, holy crap, Megan, I am going to float away if I drink that much water during the day. But here's the good news is that all fluids count, right? All fluids count. So that includes your coffee. Thank you. You're welcome, right? It includes tea, juice, seltzer waters, soda, sparkling water, and even energy drinks actually technically count towards your hydration goals. As much to my dismay, I really was hoping the energy drinks didn't count, but here we are. That's what the evidence says, so that's what I'm going to say, right? And you might be thinking, well, Megan, I heard that caffeine was a diuretic. And yes, that's true. In doses lower than 300 milligrams in a sitting, which some of you guys can challenge me to get right through those bangs, Celsius heats, those rains. But under 300 milligrams of caffeine in a sitting can be fine from a hydration standpoint. Research suggests that yes, you may pee more in that first hour, but the total body hydration over the course of the day stays the same because you just replace the liquid that you lost with the coffee, tea, the energy drink, whatever that thing is that you just drank. So when I say 125 ounces, that's pretty much a gallon of fluid a day, but it can be from whatever fluids you really tend to drink, whatever you want. So that makes that a little bit more attainable for you to reach those hydration goals. Now, I'm not saying that if you should be drinking like 7 energy drinks a day to hit these numbers, right? Like eventually there's a point where too much caffeine is too much caffeine. So, and we'll brief on caffeine in a little bit, but again, your coffees, your teas, your juices, those count. Most of my first responders are habitual caffeine drinkers, and the research suggests that habitual caffeine drinkers don't lose as much fluid over time or in that first hour as people who, are new to drinking caffeine. So 125 ounces. Now, the other things that we have to consider other than just your day-to-day fluid goals, right? So that's our day-to-day number. Sometimes you're going to need more of that, the more active, the more hot trainings you participate in, right? But what about like rapid rehydration? What about electrolyte products, right? And there's a bunch of different electrolyte products here at FDIC boothing and that kind of thing. And I'm not saying that all of them, don't have a place in terms of use for first responders. However, there are going to be some that I'm going to prefer over others based on the current level of evidence for rapid rehydration. So you want to look for a product called an oral rehydration solution, an ORS product. And the ORS products, or oral rehydration solutions, were developed by the World Health Organization in response to the cholera epidemic. And the cholera epidemic, they needed IV fluids in large quantities. Unfortunately, they could not get them to where people needed to. So they needed a product that could be administered orally to rapidly clear up mild to moderate dehydration equal to IV fluids. A product that can work as well as IV fluids for mild to moderate dehydration. That's huge, right? Starting a line on someone, number one, that's a risk for infection, though it may be low. But number two, at least it's paperwork, at the very least in the academy setting, like you don't need to transport somebody. We don't want to do that, right? And usually by the time we get there, that's the case, right? So what type of products are oral rehydration solutions? Well, number one, they're going to have double the sodium and half the sugar of your sports drinks. And sports drinks certainly have a place for replacing glycogen or replacing glucose to keep pushing hard for things like overhaul or hot trainings, right? But your oral rehydration solutions are primarily for fixing hydration fast. They're not for replacing carbs. They are for fixing hydration. Okay, so how does that work? And when I say half the sugar and double the sodium, we're looking at about 500 milligrams of sodium and about 10 to 15 grams of sugar in a 16-ounce stick, right? So there's usually 8-ounce sticks and 16-ounce sticks. This formulation is imperative, right? And I'm seeing a lot of my first responders or say chiefs, those who are stocking rehab units, maybe volunteers, reaching out to me to recommend what product do they buy to stock rehabs, to stock canteens, right? And they want the healthiest option. So they automatically, their knee-jerk reaction is, well, the healthiest option is sugar-free. And while that may be good in a day-to-day scenario where you're sitting in a day room, air conditioned or a light workout, that doesn't really correlate over to the fire ground because sugar is a key ingredient for oral rehydration solutions. Okay. So the reason it's a key ingredient is because you gain access to an additional point on the cell to increase hydration or to rehydrate faster. And when a firefighter is about to bonk out, right, I need them to rehydrate fast. Okay. Because we don't want to transport them. We want them to get back into that fire and do the things that they want to do. So, you gain an extra entry point called the sodium glucose co-transporter. And in order for sodium to get into the cell, you need glucose available. So glucose binds to that transporter like a key. Sodium then can go through and pass through into the cell to rehydrate faster, right? So when you have a sugar-free product, a sugar-free electrolyte product, while it has its place, they're not as effective as products that actually contain sugar for that reason. Okay. So when we're talking about like preventing diabetes and preventing all these things that are sugar related, potentially over consuming conditions, that's not on the fire ground. Okay. Our firefighters are not getting diabetes from having an oral rehydration solution on the fire ground. Right. In fact, it's actually probably a higher risk to not provide these to your firefighters who have prediabetes or these other conditions. Because they're not hydrating quickly enough, right? So when you are choosing a hydration product, we want to go for something that is an oral rehydration solution. So types of products, drip drop, liquid IV, fluid tactical ORS are some of the three main ones in the market that I'm familiar with. I really like drip drop. They actually have a booth here at FDIC in Lucas Oil Stadium. So stop by there today. I'll be there probably chatting around with people, but so that you can try that product, right? You want the oral rehydration solution so that it is equal to IV fluids for mild to moderate dehydration. Okay. So these are things that you can use, again, in high intensity sweaty scenarios. Okay. So you're not drinking drip drop or liquid IV or those kinds of things in the day room. At the county I worked with, we decided, especially during the summer months, we see a lot of people falling out due to dehydration. Right. And we decided that we were going to provide a case of, drip drop to each of our stations, right? I sent out a nice letter with pictures, and the picture said, drink in high intensity sweaty scenarios, not in the day room. And guess where the firefighters were drinking the drip drop? In the day room. Okay, so we don't want to drink these things in the day room because the sodium you don't need that much sodium, when you're sitting around the firehouse, but you do need that much sodium on the fire ground because we have research that supports that firefighters lose 40 ounces of sweat in 30 minutes of fire suppression related activity. 30 minutes of fire suppression related activity. Okay. So 40 ounces of sweat, those Stanley cups that everybody was losing their minds about over the holidays? That's how much firefighters are losing in high intensity sweaty scenarios, right? 40 ounces of sweat. And what a lot of people don't realize is that's not just water. That's electrolytes, your sodium, your potassium, your calcium, your magnesium. You're losing that through sweat. And 32 ounces, which is not even what people are losing, has about somewhere between 460 to 1,840 milligrams of sodium in that sweat. And for context, there are people who need, lower sodium diets of about 2,000 milligrams of sodium per day. So my firefighters are sweating out what some people need for sodium in a day in 30 minutes. So that rehydration, the electrolyte products are imperative to prolong performance, to rehydrate, but also replace losses. So when it comes to electrolytes, the rule of thumb that I like to say is you use them when you lose them. So when you're sweaty, even if you're just like a medic running back-to-back calls to the nursing home, if you're sweating a ton over the summer, you may need at least one of these ORS products a day. If you are on the fire ground, if you are doing high intensity training, maybe you're adjuncting at the academy when you get off of a 24-hour shift, you actually may need about 3 of these in a day. And really the best way to know how much you need is to get like a sensor, like an H drop or a NIX sensor, which just basically tapes onto your arm and the sweat flows through it. And you can determine exactly how much sodium, potassium, and those kinds of things that you're losing. But those sensors, most people are going to have to buy those out of pocket for about $100, right? So sodium, potassium, that kind of thing, those sweat sensors can be very useful if you are regularly doing high intensity work as an instructor, or if you're on your field training team, field training officer teams. Typically, we do recommend preloading your electrolytes on days that you know you have high intensity trainings. So if your pee is a light yellow or even a darker yellow, then we would preload with one of the 16-ounce packets of, say, Drip Drop Liquid IV or Fluid Tactical. So you want to make sure that you are using the right concentration as well with these products. And what does that mean? The right concentration for an oral rehydration solution is going to tell you on the back of the package. So the thicker sticks are usually about a 16-ounce, mixing into 16 ounces of fluid. The smaller sticks are going to be 8 ounces. But what I see my first responders doing is they take their 32-ounce water bottle, they dump a stick in there, and they just go off with their day. These aren't water flavorers, right? We can find other products that are great for water flavoring. However, these are for rapid rehydration, and the concentration of sodium, glucose, and water matter. So if you get a drip drop later today and you want to rapidly rehydrate, maybe again, you overindulged or something like that, then you're going to mix that into a 16-ounce water bottle to rapidly rehydrate. Now, keep in mind, these products are going to keep about 500 milligrams of sodium in them. They're going to taste salty. And usually once you're already sweaty and like you've lost a good amount of fluid, they actually taste pretty good. It's when you're sitting and you're cooled down that they don't taste so great, right? So hydration, just to cap that or round that up, for hydration overall for my first responders, we want to go for 90 to 125 ounces of fluid per day. All fluids, including coffee, counts. And then when you are doing high intensity sweating trainings or drills, we want a product called an oral rehydration solution that has sugar. Do not skip the sugar in your electrolyte products, because that sugar is going to rehydrate you faster than a product without sugar, right? So that's our bit on hydration. Now, a bit on, coming off of the hydration tangent, let's talk about caffeine. So this is another one of my favorite things to talk to first responders about. And usually they think the scary vegetable lady is going to come out and tell them they should never have coffee. They should never have caffeine again. And that's how I get set on fire and not put out, right? So we will not make that recommendation, and we will go based off of the FDA recommendation of 400 milligrams of caffeine total in a day, right? 400 milligrams of caffeine in a day is roughly 30 to 40 ounces of coffee total in a day. 30 to 40 ounces of coffee total, okay? I think that's reasonable. The firefighters running, 4 to 5 calls after midnight tell me that's rookie numbers, right? Okay, so ideally we want to keep it around 400 milligrams there. Most of my firefighters are not really getting to that like through coffee or tea alone. Where they are getting to that higher number is through things like energy drinks, right? Or pre-workout supplements, those kinds of things. And I can't come to you and say that energy drinks are in any way good for you, right? I don't care that Celsius has a fruit on the front. That doesn't mean it's the healthy energy drink. There really aren't healthy energy drinks, right? Not only is the caffeine a concern, usually it's in very high doses of 200 to 300 milligrams, typically in those higher dose energy drinks, but it also has things like taurine, gluconolactone, and guronolactone. Some of these additives have some research to suggest that they may increase the risk for things like Parkinson's disease, endocrine disorders, seizures, and migraines in those who drink one of them per day every day. So usually that doesn't get wave reviews from a crowd when I go to a fire station. I understand that. But that's part of the reason why I don't recommend them. The other side of it too is a lot of my first responders overlook the side effects of caffeine because they're already kind of miserable from being sleep deprived or stressed or working overtime, right? So they already feel like crap. So what's a little bit more feeling like crap? And a lot of the side effects that are related to caffeine are going to be anxiety, right? So sometimes I will have a firefighter who's really struggling with managing their anxiety. And then I ask them about their caffeine intake, and it's like 1,200 milligrams a day. Again, we want it to be 400. Like they're a little high. It actually might be the anxiety that's the caffeine that's fueling your anxiety. So while that could also be something that we talk to a behavioral health therapist about, it could be the caffeine. Another thing that a lot of firefighters don't realize with caffeine is that caffeine actually can worsen acid reflux, right? And while I don't have incidence numbers for how many firefighters have acid reflux, I feel like it's any firefighter over the age of 28. Like you hit 26, 28, and it's all downhill from there, right? And acid reflux, a lot of people think the main sign is going to be like a burning in your chest, or like, the acid kind of splashing back up. But sometimes it can just be like your stomach hurts or like burns, maybe feels raw all the time, and you don't really know why. And usually it's worse at night or in the morning. That may be acid reflux. And again, I'm not a physician. You got to talk to a doctor. You got to go to a GI about this and potentially get a scope to see what's going on. But the caffeine can actually lower the pressure of the lower esophageal sphincter. And that lower esophageal sphincter is what's responsible for that acid splashing back up. So if you have certain foods like caffeine, lowering that pressure, it can cause the acid reflux to be worse, right? So when it comes to caffeine, keep in mind, it can worsen anxiety. It can worsen acid reflux. The other thing that caffeine can worsen, of course, is sleep quality. So it can cause insomnia. Now, sometimes I have firefighters with their energy drinks going up to somewhere between I've seen 1,200 milligrams of caffeine. I've seen 1,600 milligrams of caffeine in a day. I've seen 2,600 milligrams of caffeine in a day. Okay. Like you guys can go for the high score sometimes, right? And that amount of caffeine is typically not just consumed earlier in the day. It's starting to get consumed closer to when you go to bed. And you might sit here and say, well, Megan, I can have a cup of coffee right before I go to bed and have no problem falling asleep. And it's not going to prevent you from falling asleep, okay? It's going to mess with your sleep cycles, right? You spend less time in rapid eye movement sleep. You spend less time in deep sleep. You wake up the next day feeling like crap. And then what do you reach for more of? Caffeine. So it becomes this cycle of drinking caffeine too late, not getting great quality sleep, reaching for more caffeine the next day, and you constantly get on this hamster wheel of feeling like crap, right? So you want to make sure that you leave a 4 to 5 hour buffer from your last caffeinated beverage and bedtime, right? And this will help optimize your sleep cycles. So I have done some of my little witchcraft, right, and gotten my first responders to leave that buffer between bedtime when possible. Usually it's going to be off shift or maybe when they're at a medium slower station, to pull back on that caffeine 4 to 5 hours prior to bedtime. And then we pull back on caffeine overall. And what they end up finding is they're actually sleeping better. So they have more energy on 400 milligrams of caffeine than they did on 800. Right? So then they think I did witchcraft, right? When really all we did was change up their strategies of when they're using caffeine to maximize their sleep quality and then therefore maximize their energy levels, right? So caffeine, really paying attention to when you're using it can be very important, right? And I'm not saying caffeine is bad at all. It's a great tool for maximizing, for improving cognition, for improving physical performance. It's just my firefighters aren't using it as a tool to, improve performance per se. They are using it, as a lifeline. Right? They're using it to try and stay awake through the shift, to try and get through the extra overtime, to try and get through daycare with their kids when they're finally off shift, right? So if we're using it as a lifeline, we need to start looking at, are you overdoing it or not, right? Now, going to the energy drinks, while I don't recommend them, I also know my first responders are not going to listen to me when it comes to energy drinks, right? So in choosing a better energy drink, we want to try and choose one that has 200 milligrams of caffeine or less. And sometimes this can be difficult to tell which energy drinks have that because they put it in this like super tiny label somewhere on the energy drink. Sometimes it's not even on there. And you might have to Google it, right? But I've gotten to the sad point in my career where I'm recommending Monsters and Red Bulls because they're half the caffeine of Celsius Heat, Reign, and Bang, right? So if I have a firefighter drinking 3 Bangs a day and I get them to switch to 3 Monsters a day, I've effectively cut their caffeine in half without taking the behavior of drinking an energy drink every day, right? So there are strategies like the better bad decision strategies tend to work best with my first responders over the cold turkey strategy, right? Because cutting caffeine, especially cold turkey, can lead to 2 to 9 days of migraines, flu-like symptoms, increased anxiety, and even low mood, which is certainly concerning in the first responder population. So cutting caffeine cold turkey is really probably not your best idea. We want to slowly phase off of it, right? Maybe switching from the regular caffeinated energy drinks to a lower caffeinated energy drink, maybe from a regular coffee to a half calf. Those things can be very effective strategies for modulating your caffeine intake. Now, another thing that's really important for modulating caffeine intake is actually eating food, right? So, what a lot of my firefighters think is that caffeine gives them energy, but caffeine does not give your body energy. The energy that your body needs is food and sleep, but we can have that conversation later, right? So, food provides energy. Now, how does caffeine work? Why do I feel awake? Why do I feel like I can see sounds when I have caffeine? Well, as you go throughout your day, sleep pressure starts to build in the brain, and adenosine starts to bind to transmitters in the brain to tell you that, or tell your brain that you're tired, right? Usually you start to feel this 1, 2 o'clock after lunchtime kind of thing. And what caffeine does is you drink your cup of coffee and it actually pushes adenosine out of the way and binds to those receptors, reducing the feeling of fatigue. So it doesn't provide your body the energy through, say, carbs or something like that. It's just reducing the feeling of fatigue, which again can be very effective from a performance and cognition standpoint. But again, when you're overdoing food, or excuse me, overdoing caffeine over food, that actually might be the gap that you're missing. So a lot of times the firefighters who are drinking too much caffeine are also skipping meals, are also skipping snacks. They're not eating before a workout because they thought it would help them burn more fat. And what we end up doing is adding carbs before the workout. We give them 2 applesauce pouches before their workout, even if it's at 4 a.m., which automatically boosts the energy of their workout. We make sure they get some carbs and protein after that workout. And then we make sure that they have a go bag on hand so they have backup snacks if meals accidentally get skipped due to trainings, drills, transports, whatever that is, right? So make sure you keep that go bag on hand because that actually can be a key factor to maximizing your energy levels and then also preventing you from eating everything that's not tied down when you finally get back to the station, right? So, keeping a go bag on hand can be essential for that. Now, when you're packing your go bag, we want to choose things that are non-perishable, right? You can keep a cooler bag on whatever unit you're assigned to. But the challenge is then, like, if you don't eat the snacks in the cooler bag, you're constantly replacing them or they go bad, whatever. So I usually like to go with non-perishable options, which usually blows the first responder mind because they're like, well, I thought I wasn't supposed to eat out of packages. And yes, the whole food diet, like eating whole foods that are fresh is probably ideal, but also like, is it ideal for this population? Maybe if you're a chief in an air conditioned office, but if you're a firefighter on the line, that might not actually be the realistic option. And then usually when that's not the realistic option, they just say, screw it, right? So what's the middle point? It's finding healthier packaged products that can stay in a go bag that you can eat as a snack when you're stuck at a gas leak for 3 hours, not knowing what you're going to eat next. And this go bag will not only keep you fueled for calls like that, even if they're not the most active ones, but it will also keep you from not eating everything that's not tied down when you finally get back to the station, right? It can actually help reduce your portions at dinner or later in the day. So, what am I going to pack in that go bag? As mentioned, your applesauce pouches, smoothie pouches like Noka. There's another brand called Smoothie Pouches on Amazon. Um, Nuts and seeds, trail mixes, dried fruit. That's it bars. Whole grain cereals, just like little bags of whole grain cereals, like mini wheats, actually are pretty high in fiber. And Cheerios are also fantastic for that. You're going to also pack an ORS packet like Drip Drop or Liquid IV into that bag as well so that you make sure you have your hydration product on hand. Tuna packets, chicken packets, jerky. There are these little like protein oatmeal bars that are oatmeal balls that you can get on Amazon, or sometimes I've seen them at Costco. Fruit cups and juice. So I'm a 90s kid, right? when I grew up, we had these fruit cups in like cocktail syrup, and it had like the little cherry, and it was like thick and weird. Or maybe it was enjoyable to you when you were a kid, but the fruit cups now are just in juice for the most part. So there's clementines in grape juice, there's peaches in pineapples and pineapple juice, right? And those, you don't need to have them refrigerated. You peel the layer off, you chuck it back, and you're on with your day. So that is an easy way to get a full serving of fruit that's not going to go bad. Actually, that's the way I've been getting fruit lately because I had a baby several months ago and I've had like 5 pineapples die on the counter and, I never got around to cutting them. So that was the next best bet for me, was to have an alternative right there. So those are all things that you can pack in that go bag that are not going to require refrigeration. You want to have plenty of options, right? Sometimes people just throw a fig bar in their bag and they're like, this will be enough for 24 hours. Wrong, right? You want to be able to have enough snacks available so that if you do get stuck on longer calls, if you have a larger incident, and the canteen's not there in time, you have some snacks so that you can maximize your energy levels if you missed meals, right? So the go bag is a key factor to eating healthier on shift because it helps you not eat everything that's not tied down when you finally get back to that station. Okay. So I'll wrap it up with a couple more station hacks and we'll go on from there. So one other great hack for when you are at the station is to look at the treat counter, right? And you might be like, well, Megan, I'm trying to avoid the treat counter. I try not to make eye contact with it because when I make eye contact with it, I eat like 6 donuts, right? And what I've noticed with my firefighters is, right, you have this huge counter of treats, and every time you get back from a call, you take a quarter of a donut. And then you get back from another call and you take a quarter of a donut. And then you take another quarter of a donut. At every call, you're picking up a quarter of a donut. And then you see the dietitian and you say, well, Megan, I've only had a quarter of the donut today. And I'm like, you've had 6 donuts today. I know you. I'm on to you. I know what you're doing, right? So in order to prevent that, right, or to reduce how frequently you do that, you can actually hide these treats behind a closed pantry or a closed door. And you might be saying, well, Megan, that's not going to work. Wrong. So Dr. Jill Joyce did a preliminary study with firefighters where she received some grant funding to donate healthier options to the fire stations, right? So she was able to donate clementines, apples, bananas, granola bars, nuts and seeds. I think she did like a veggie tray as well. And in order for the stations to receive these healthier snacks, there was one rule. You had to hide all of the treats behind a closed door or pantry, and only Dr. Joyce's healthier options could be on the counters and on the tables, okay? And what she found was that firefighters ate an additional pound of produce per shift when the healthier options were in sight and the less healthy options were out of sight and out of mind. Right? Because a lot of firefighters, they get back to the station, they take a lap around the kitchen table. And when there's less healthy options, that's what's going to be what they pick at. Right? So everybody, I know I've worked for counties where there's like an overtime tradition where you bring donuts or cookies or some other treat. And they'll tell me, well, Megan, I can't suddenly just bring Kind bars or a bag of apples. I'll get made fun of. And the reality is in the fire service, are you not going to get made fun of for something? Aren't you? I get made fun of for stuff all the time. I'm a civilian, right? And, you're probably going to get made fun of for something. Is it really the worst thing to get made fun of for bringing apples to the station, right? And yeah, sure, no one's going to take an apple from you right away. But we also notice with the donuts, no one takes a donut right at lineup. They start picking at it throughout the day, right? So having those healthy options at the station can be key to making better choices. Okay. So we've talked about a lot of different topics from a nutrition standpoint today. We've hit on the protein and a plant, trying to get that at each meal, regardless of if you're traveling or not. We talked about hydration goals, caffeine, eating for performance, and then we've also talked about a few station hacks. Okay. So if you've enjoyed this live podcast of Fueling Fire, keep an eye for it under the Firefighter Nation family of podcasts. I believe my Fueling Fire podcast gets posted every Friday. I'll be interviewing experts in the fire firefighter wellness space on hot topics. I believe the next one is actually going to be with Mike Connor on testosterone. And then we have some on prediabetes, cancer risk reduction, and those kinds of things in the lineup as well. So my name is Megan Lautz. I'm a civilian registered dietitian that specializes in first responders. I have a business called Rescue RD that provides workshops to counties on nutrition. So reach out to me, Megan, at Rescue RD. And if not, tune into Fueling Fire every second Friday of the month. Enjoy the conference.